Juan, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Pleasure being here.
So you are a couples therapist.
Yeah, I'm a clinical psychologist, but I do couple therapy, singular.
Now, we were speaking a little bit earlier, and I'm curious about a few things. So if I've been married almost 35 years, if I want to start seeing a doctor, a therapist, my wife and I decide that that's what we need to do. What are some of the indicators that maybe we actually do need to see a therapist?
Well, if you get to the point where you start thinking you probably should.
Right.
And it's probably already a little bit too late. Not too late in a bad way, but it probably means there's been a level of distress, discomfort that's been brewing. People don't go the first time they have an argument, we should go to couple therapy.
Right.
Usually it takes a couple of years at least.
But also, I would imagine that, because I've been married a long time, we've had lots of arguments. I don't think arguing is a bad thing. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, of course.
I guess it would be how you argue, yes? That would be an indicator.
How you argue and whether you repair.
Meaning how you sort of speak to each other afterwards?
So the first is the build-up. What happens during the argument? Now, any argument, people get heated, people probably say things that are not great. That's normal. But it can also escalate to a point where it just gets increasingly abusive and corrosive. I'm not talking about hard abuse. I'm talking about the stuff we say to each other that are hurtful and that's going to linger. Or it can lead to a sort of one person walks out or we both walk out and the conversation shuts down. With what then happens is there isn't a repair. It doesn't have to happen immediately. But the key difference is whether a couple can go, pause, and talk about what has happened in a way that leads to something different. That's the critical bit. Because some couples, they engage in a conversation, but it's not a true agreement of how do we move forward. And for me, I always say they don't get to a shared narrative. There's one person's narrative or story is dominant, stronger. The other one sort of gives in. That's not a shared narrative. A couple of years down the line, you're just going to sit with resentment. A true shared narrative is when we actually have a shared story of what had happened here, which is a mix of both, a bit of compromise on both sides. That's the key for conflict.
So for you, when couples come to you, is the challenge to dig into some of the issues that lead to the arguing, or is the bigger challenge trying to get people to argue well? Or the third option, is it how they speak to each other afterwards? Or is it a combination of all three things?
A combination of all of it. The core thing for me in working with couples, people talk about relationships, what is it about? And you'll hear words like it's love, respect, and listening. It's not that, in my opinion. It's conversation. It's the ability to talk in a way, a true two-way conversation, where the things that happen in the conversation doesn't do damage and doesn't provoke, trigger, or ignite, so to speak. And for me, to change conflict is about changing the way there are conversations, how we talk. Conversation for me is literally the foundation of the relationship. That's what I focus on. The other stuff flows naturally from it. Like if we have a nice conversation now, it feels nice, right?
Right.
That's the most basic form of intimacy. But couples stop having that. They stop experiencing that with each other. It feels competitive. It feels oppositional. It becomes polarized. And then as the emotions rise, the stuff we say to each other adds fuel to the fire. 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line, you have this thing, I call it the legacy of injury. It's this landscape of, or maybe it's a minefield of all the stuff, all the times we've had a conversation where it did not work. So conversation is how we repair. But the thing for most couples that's actually problematic is that they cannot have a conversation anymore.
So, and they can't have a conversation because they don't know how to speak to each other, or because they're afraid that they're going to deteriorate to a point where they start yelling and saying things that they might regret.
It can be both. It's where they have tried to talk. So they've had conversations, and the things that get said, how they get said, it's very, the words that are used, how they are listening or not responding to what the other person is saying, all of that means the conversation doesn't actually go to a sort of a shared place. It's a divergent conversation. One person talks and they talk about their experience, and they use a word that triggers the other person, and now that person is busy responding to that word and that trigger, and how from that emotional state back and forth, and it just goes in different directions. That's the most common thing that I see in conversations. They're not actually having, I sometimes say to couples, I will stop them saying, you're not having the same conversation.
Right.
You're literally talking about different things. And it's not intentional. No one is, there's nothing malicious. It's just we get activated and we don't realize we are no longer responding to the other person, and vice versa. Because each person is sort of fighting their corner,
Right.
wanting to get heard, which is completely natural. We all want that.
So when couples come to you and they feel that there are issues that they need to speak to a professional about, are you in a position where you will maybe give them some advice and say, I think you need to see someone on your own in addition to this? Or is it you just work with the two of them based on what it is that they're trying to achieve?
It can be different combinations. Generally, if a couple comes to me, I'll start working with both. If one or both of them get so dysregulated that they cannot tolerate the couple therapy process, because couple therapy is not like some forms of individual therapy. It's reactive. It stirs stuff up. It really, the intensity really goes up. And sometimes that is outside of people's window of tolerance. And if that happens, especially early on, I will pause and say, need some support here. Not in a way of saying, and I always have to make this very clear, this is not saying you're the problem, this is your fault, there's something wrong with you. Think of it as neurobiology. There's nothing personal. It doesn't mean anything. We need to get both of you to a place where you can stay in the difficult conversation.
When you have a couple in your office, do you act as, and I assume that there are different forms of therapy that you're offering, do you act as a referee and you sort of stand back and you let them argue so that you can observe and maybe give them directions about how they should improve their presentation of their thoughts? Or are you guiding them more about how they need to interact with each other?
Again, a bit of both.
Right.
When couples come the first time, I generally don't let them talk to each other. Not that I'm forbidding it. I don't do anything where they engage directly with each other, because I make an assumption. If you're here, doing that doesn't work. Usually you have had so many attempts of doing it that it's just going to flare up. Do I sometimes let an argument play out so I can understand the pattern? And that's specifically what I'm looking for, the unique pattern. The type of things he says, the type of things she says, and how it escalates and spirals and what happens. So do I sometimes do that? Yes, but it's a much more proactive form of therapy, or the way I work in any case. So sometimes yes, but very often it is about slowing it down. And when we start doing that, there's been a lot of shoring up in terms of helping both of them connect with what's actually going on for them, the core emotions, maybe coming back to one of your earlier questions there, as well as really connecting what's actually happening for the other person. One person may see frustration, anger. We want to get to the core emotions, how your partner is actually feeling broken, hopeless, shamed, how you may be feeling lonely. And that's actually the early part of the work, to connect to what is underneath the noise of the relationship, the typical stuff that we say and that we see in the other person. And from that place, and then with some structural work, we get to a place of slowly having them start to have new types of conversations that feel different.
So I don't want to pin you down, but I'm going to ask anyhow. If you were to generalize, top 3 reasons that are at the core why couples go through very difficult stretches, what would the top 3 reasons be?
Difficult stretches or just
Well, where they go through strain, where they recognize, oh, okay, we need to see somebody. Is it money? Is it sex? Is it raising the kids? Is it religion? Is it?
I mean, there are family stuff, larger stuff,
Sure.
like transitions in terms of kids leaving the house, and those are sort of very classic, well-known things. In terms of the typical things that I see, it's the core, one of the key reasons is that friction between individuality and difference, or individuality and togetherness. So me as an individual, us as a
Couple.
unit.
Right.
So individuality and togetherness, that tension is one of the core tensions in a relationship. Now, if we've met in our 20s, we were different people, but we change. Both of us change, our careers change, our priorities change. Maybe there are kids on the table. Hopefully not the kids on the table. Kids on the scene, financial issues, career stuff, all of this is happening. So we are changing, and we may be changing at different rates. And what very often happens is couples don't know how to renegotiate what is this about. I mean, one of the key stressful periods for a couple is 1 to 2 years after the birth of the first child. Everyone is happy, this is beautiful, the baby is so cute. What no one's looking at is you're literally approaching that first major crisis point. And I often see this when that is a year, 2 years, 3 years down the line. That's when couples come in. They don't know how to navigate it. We used to be 2, now we are 3. Everything is different. We don't get our needs met. We have fewer emotional, physical resources. So all of these things, I think, are very difficult for couples. And then if there are already vulnerabilities in the way they talk, it really gets amplified.
So you had mentioned something about kids and whatnot. I want to ask a couple of questions. Pop culture would say that they are real, and I want to find out from you if they are. So my wife and I, we have 29-year-old twins, and they went home to Canada for university when they were turning 18. I don't think, my wife might have a different answer, I don't think we went through a rough patch or a difficult moment when they left, and it was just the 2 of us again.
Okay.
But my first question, is that usually an issue for men and women when, the empty nest syndrome?
For some, not for everyone.
Right.
You're right. It depends on a lot of factors. You can go through it and it can be fine.
Right.
But you can see if your sort of time has been so focused on the kids, getting them through school, maybe very different roles, the role difference is pretty important, and suddenly they're gone, suddenly you have to engage with each other.
Right.
And the fact that you probably haven't prioritized that will also come to the surface. If your kids leave and you feel, well, we still seem to be okay, then you probably manage that in a good way.
The other thing that pop psychology would sort of talk to you about is the midlife crisis. Now, I believe it's true. I went through one in my early 40s. I know some people will get hair plugs. Obviously, I didn't do that. Or they'll get a sports car, or they'll get a girlfriend, or a divorce. I got tattoos, lots and lots of tattoos. That was my midlife crisis. First part, is it real? And why does it happen?
It's real on an individual level. We're going through different life stages, and I think wherever it falls, if it's in your 40s or in your 50s, it depends. It's a time when we pause and we start looking back. And as you probably know, and I've gone through that myself, and you realize the time ahead is much less. And it forces you to start to rethink at some level. Now, everyone doesn't do this consciously and reflectively, but it surfaces. And it gets expression in different ways. And suddenly you've got the sports car and the hair plugs, and no problem, but maybe I need those. But it's a real thing. The fact that we as humans go through different transitions, where exactly you place them is a bit arbitrary. It depends on a lot of different factors. But of course, you're not the same person you are when you were 20.
No. And absolutely, I'm not.
Yeah.
Now, when I say, so I'm 59 and I play hockey, ice hockey, and I play with a lot of guys who are in their some 20s, 30s, 40s, and we'll talk about some of the stuff that they were going through. I went through my midlife crisis in my early 40s, and some of them are going through it. And what I say to them, my advice, don't do anything rash. It will pass. It may take 6 months, it may take 18 months, but you'll come out on the other end and you'll feel more of yourself. Does that sound right, or am I leading people astray?
No, I think the important bit that you're saying is don't make big life decisions.
Yes.
That's really the important bit. If you start feeling you need to make drastic changes, that means something is stirring underneath it, and it's probably a good time to pause before you make big changes. Right. I think it's fair advice. Slow down.
Yeah.
And spend some time. Remember, our professional lives it just accelerates. And there's nothing that forces or pushes us to stop and really pay attention to what's happening inside.
Right.
So suddenly you get to a point and you realize at some level, I'm running out of time. This body isn't doing what it's supposed to do, and it's doing other stuff that I don't even know it's going to do. And yeah, that raises fear. That triggers a lot of anxiety.
I can remember having this conversation with my wife in the kitchen in our house in Alain, where it was, this is it. Like, I'm halfway there.
Yeah.
And, yes, great. I've got a wonderful marriage and I've got fantastic kids and a decent enough job, but it's like, what else?
Yeah.
The other question that I wanted to ask, part of that sort of pop psychology sort of stuff, because of the friends that I have and the conversations that we get into, I think women are going through midlife crises just like men used to do. Oh, men are still doing it, but I think women are doing it now as well. Is that true, do you think? Or they always would have gone through it, but they wouldn't have been able to express themselves?
Yeah, maybe there wasn't that much attention, but definitely, I think everyone goes through life transitions. The one we know a lot about is this particular one around midlife, which is, somewhere between 40s or 50s. But there are a lot of other major transitions. They're real, as long as one doesn't turn it into this factual thing. And for people experience life differently, they go through stuff at different times. But yeah, definitely men and women, both.
When couples come to therapy, do you ever, maybe you can find out quickly enough, but do you find that men are more interested in going to couples therapy, or is it women are sort of pushing in that direction?
I think you know the answer.
Yeah, I think I do too. Okay.
90% of times.
90%, would you say?
Well, based on my experience,
Right.
I'm not going to throw out a general statistic.
But anecdotally,
Generally, in my experience, it's the wife, the woman bringing the man into the process.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, yeah.
And will men at some point open up enough that the sessions become productive for both the husband and the wife?
Absolutely, it won't work otherwise. The part where it's typically a woman bringing the man into couple therapy, there's a lot of assumptions about that. For example, that women are more psychologically minded, that women are more emotionally mature or emotionally literate. I don't agree with a lot of those ideas. Men and women, and I hate sort of grouping people, I'm not saying it's an absolute, experience things very differently. Women may be more likely to talk about it, express, and have a bigger vocabulary of emotional words. In my experience, when you create the space, when the man when men feel, hold on, this space is for them as much, we're not here on the wife's agenda. We're here for both of you. They step into this space and they use it.
When the husband and wife are coming in and they're talking to you, do you think, so I was raised Catholic, and in Catholicism, traditionally before you get married, you would have to go to certain sessions that traditionally a priest would be holding. We're talking about communication and all those sorts of things. I ended up marrying a Muslim, so obviously I didn't stay true to the faith. But do you think it would actually benefit couples if they had to go through therapy sessions before they got married, so that a professional could say, these are going to be some of the pitfalls that you're probably going to encounter. You might want to start dealing with them now.
Absolutely. The majority of people who come to couple therapy come very late, sometimes too late, in the relationship, marriage or not. And it's rare. It's really, for me, always the exception. And I notice it when a couple comes in and say, we're actually okay. We just want to check, are we okay? I always find that so refreshing and so sad that it's so rare that this happens. So to come back to your question, absolutely. If people earlier on do this type of thing, and my sister, I remember years ago, her and her husband, they're farmers in South Africa. They go to all these couple retreats. And she was telling me how one of her friends asked her, is everything okay? And she said, we make sure it is. And I always remember this, coming from my sister, who was like, this is so, if more people had this frame of mind, that we're going to proactively invest.
They're going to work at it.
Yeah, we're going to work on it. We're not doing it because there's a problem. We're doing it to prevent there from being problems. But it's very rare.
So that brings up an interesting question. I got married, this is not my therapy session. I'm not using you free of charge, but I got married at 24 years of age. And my wife and I traditionally would talk about how after 3 years, 5 years, you look back and you realize, I don't see things the same way as I once did. My body has changed. We now have kids. We've now been married longer. Whatever the case is. How can you make sure that couples are aware that I got married at 24, I'm 59 now. I've changed very much from who I was when I got married. How do you make sure that you both move in the same direction? Maybe that's not even the right word, but as you grow, evolve, you still are able to touch base so that you're still familiar to the other person. And you're not so different that you no longer have something in common. What we did is when our kids, I guess were about 12 or so, when they could be left at home alone during the day, we'd go for like date coffee. And then when they got a little bit older, we'd maybe continue to do that, but then we'd also go out like on a date night, right? What is the best way, I guess this is my question, a long rambling way of getting to my question. What is the best way to make sure that as you grow and evolve, you're still making sure that you're on the same wavelength as your partner?
I think you've just described it. Prioritizing time together. So with kids, as you know, when there are all these obligations, we may do a lot of stuff together, but it's sort of life admin, chores, stuff around the kids, stuff around the family. You have to protect the couple bubble, just the pair of us, and you have to have enough time, and both people need to proactively make that happen. I know people talk a lot about date nights. If that's your thing, then do it. That's fine. But it's not something you leave, for every Friday or every second Friday. It's just spending time together. It's actually connecting. You don't have to have the same interests or hobbies or even friends. I mean, those things can help, but it's about do you see the other person as your companion, as your partner, as the person you go to because you want their opinion or you just want to talk about something. If both people maintain that, make sure that space is protected, and that can be fun activities and going horse riding or whatever. You can, but it's not needed. If you have that, then you stay connected and you sort of stay in sync. Because it means as you, for example, may be going through a midlife stuff, your partner's there with you, even if they're not going through the same thing at the same time. And that helps keep the couple to stay connected, but it also means you're rooted in each other. So, for example, I think of a tree, and the roots need to connect, and we need to draw on each other. If the other person is not a resource, and that we're not a resource for them, of course we're going to drift apart. Because who is this person? That's when you get people who say, well, we're just flatmates. It's not, all the other areas may be affected, but it's about that quality time together. We prioritize it, we do stuff together, not in a performative way. It can be a Netflix series we watch. It can be anything, going for a walk. That's the stuff that matters.
How do you avoid falling into that we're just flatmates relationship? How are you able to, and I know you had talked earlier about conversations being one of the key ways for intimacy, but you're married and you got married for a reason. You know, you want the physical intimacy as well. How do you keep that side of things alive?
I think it's interesting, physical intimacy, and I'm not just talking about touch and cuddles and those things, the sort of romantic intimacy, let's call it that. It's often one of the symptoms that there's something wrong. But I think in terms of that form of intimacy, it's about what it means and whether it is talked about. Talked about, not in talking about it all the time.
Right.
There's this weird idea that if we talk a lot, it will be good. Not too much. But it is about having a relationship conversation, talking about what we need, talking about our experiences. And I think it's normalizing. There's a lot of normalizing that needs to happen. Sometimes, for some people, this form of intimacy is a way of connecting, where for others, it is an expression of connection. And that often causes a mismatch.
Right.
Now, broadly speaking, before you're going to ask me what about men, men generally, not always, connect through intimacy. With women, very often, not always, intimacy follows feeling connected. And you can see how that can become a deadlock. Because the one's like, no, I don't want to be intimate with you because you haven't even said anything nice to me.
Right.
Or we haven't even had a conversation, or you haven't been interested in what's happening at my work.
Right.
And people can get so out of sync. So it's almost holding in mind. I think this is a key part of intimacy in general. Holding in mind the other. Holding in mind the otherness of the other person.
Right.
We're a couple. As long as we can be individuals and connected, that will grow. Because we will grow individually, we can thrive individually, and there's space within the relationship to be an individual.
Right.
But we are also leaning in compromises. There will be friction because that's what happens when individuals are together. And that creates enough energy. But I'm digressing. In terms of the intimacy, I think making sure both ways of connecting is sort of normalized and leaned into.
Right.
It doesn't become we cannot be intimate until this happens.
Sure. Your professional thoughts on non-monogamous relationships.
Non-monogamous.
And do they work? And I'll throw a few questions at you. How do you bring up the idea of opening up a relationship when you've been in a monogamous relationship for so long?
Open relationships are complex.
Yeah.
And I think if it is something where both people want to do this, and this is not about judgment or morals, if this is something where both people feel this will work for us, then it should work.
Okay, but then how do you get to that point where you find out what the other wants?
But I think that's the problem. The assumption is both people want it, but the reality is usually one person who wants it a little bit more than the other one.
Yeah, we won't say who.
No.
But I again, how do you bring up that conversation?
With your partner.
Yeah, without creating a huge fight, without hurting someone's feelings.
I mean, how do you raise the question? The question, it isn't about how you raise the question. For me, immediately what comes to my mind is, how did you get here?
Right.
And I'm not saying that as a this is wrong, you shouldn't do it. I'm not saying that, but immediately my mind goes to what has been happening in this relationship
For that to be an option.
to the point where one person feels they need this.
Right.
And I'm not saying that in a relationship we meet the totality of our partner's needs, because that's a massive myth.
Yeah.
That's not true.
Right.
But I will first want to explore that. In terms of one person wanting something, I mean, you're going to have to raise it, but it's going to raise other issues. And how it lands is all going to be about where are you coming from?
Right.
What has been happening in your intimate relationship up to now? If it's not been great, if the conversations have not been great, if you haven't prioritized time with the other person, raising it at that point is just going to lead to a fracture.
Right.
I'm not saying it isn't possible, but in my experience, when it comes up, it's often symptomatic of something being wrong, but I'm not making a judgment of it. That's just from my experience.
Juan, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
It was a nice conversation. Thank you.